He is going for broke. Drew Pearson. He got it. Touchdown.
All right. Welcome in. Now about them Cowboys. This is episode number 16. Today we are talking training camp battles. The coffee is just kicking in. All right, I'm starting to fly here. I'm ready to talk Dallas Cowboys, and everybody listening at home, we appreciate you. We see the numbers going up. We see the views, the downloads, the listens. So it seems like Cowboys Nation is really showing up for the show. So I just want to let y'all know we appreciate you. And I also want to introduce my co-host back again this week from the land down under, Mr. Andrew Campey at Andrew Campey on the Twitter. What's happening?
Yeah, well, it's funny because, you mentioned you're starting your day, whereas mine's just coming to an end. So it's a bit funny. I've had a busy weekend, so I'm feeling pretty tired, and I did consider having a coffee about an hour ago, but I thought that might keep me up half the night. So I've got enough energy to talk a bit of Cowboys, and then that'll probably be the end of my night, I think.
Yeah, man. So yesterday was my birthday, and we celebrated with my daughter. My daughter's soccer team won a huge tournament in Hershey, Pennsylvania, like 2-3 weeks ago, and they picked yesterday to celebrate. So we had birthday cake, and then they had a huge Hershey's chocolate bar. It's like the world's biggest chocolate bar. It was like this thick. All right, I've never seen anything like it. And the kids were eating this at like 9-10 o'clock. So I don't know how late those kids went to bed, because that was like just a pure shot of sugar and adrenaline. But man, things are good. If you're living in the Northeast, I'm a Cowboys fan who lives in the Northeast. I don't know how your house is doing, but there's been tons of rain. Hopefully you're doing all right. But we're here to settle things down, get ready for training camp, talk about some training camp battles. And this is pretty exciting because training camp starts the 26th. They show up 10 days from today. We finally got football. I said this last week on the show. You weren't here, but I was talking to my son. My son's like, man, there's really not much to talk about with the Cowboys right now. There's not much going on. And I said, Emmett, that's a good thing. It is a great thing that there is nothing to talk about, because in years past, I hated those summers where it was like, this guy did this guy did that, this suspension, this guy took drugs. Like it was just nonstop, and knock on wood, right? Knocking on wood a little bit. Seems like under Dan Quinn and Mike McCarthy, things are a little bit different. So before we get into this training camp battle, I do want to let everybody know, if you're watching on YouTube, be greatly appreciated. Throw us a like, throw some comments on some guys you think maybe we didn't talk about in these training camp battles, or some training camp battles that we didn't talk about, or some guys that you think we were wrong about in training camp battles. Also, if you're on the Apple Podcast, throw us a 5-star review. That is greatly appreciated. And if you talk fantasy football, college football, any of that stuff, and you want to be talking to us, we have a Gilded Chat. Reach out to me on Twitter at Coach Sheps. Reach out to the show at Toilets to Titles. Or if you don't have either of those, reach out to us, toiletstotitles@gmail.com. I'll get you the link to our chat. It's in Gilded. And in there, you're going to have 24/7 access to all the members of Toilets to Titles and over 160 members of the NFL fantasy football community, where we're constantly talking. Right now, we're talking Scott Fishbowl. We're talking training camp. We're talking all sorts of stuff. We'd love to have you in there, so we'd appreciate that. So, Camp, let's start with some offensive line discussion. So what do you think is the kind of the biggest battle for the offensive line going into this year's training camp?
Well, I think right now the biggest battle is the health of Terrence Steele. Really, I mean, I think there's a fair bit of hope that he's going to be ready to go, and if he's ready to roll, then there's probably no discussion on who's going to be starting at that right tackle spot. But if he's not 100% week one, it's going to create a sort of interesting conversation, I think. But So far so good on his kind of recovery. So hopefully that'll be all all good. And then, if he is all good, then you start thinking, well, the line feels like at some point they're going to they're going to come up with an agreement on the left guard, left tackle kind of combination, and then I think right guard's probably sorted. So it just becomes that question of what really is the balance? And I mean, we've talked about on the show previously about the fact that the Cowboys allegedly have a Pro Bowl center. Whether or not you agree with that or not, at this stage, I don't really see anyone sort of passing him. So I think it's really a case of if Terrence Steele's good to go, then I feel like they've got their best 5 players and they'll just have to figure out the combination. Whereas if Terrence Steele's not ready to go, then it sort of becomes a question of how they handle, Tyron Smith, Tyler Smith, and if one of those has to be kicked outside, then who plays left guard, really?
Yeah, and also Terrence Steele is coming up on a contract year, so I think there's some competition for depth behind him. Who, if Terrence Steele is gone, because I don't think they expect Tyron Smith to be here next year as well. So I think Matt Waletzko and Josh Ball. I think there's a big competition between those two as to who's the next guy up. When the time comes, when they need to make the call, when they need to put somebody in there and it's not Tyron or Terrence, if it's not Tyron or Terrence, which one of them two is it? And then also I think there's a competition between rookie Asim Richards and veteran Chuma Edoga. I think only one of those two are going to make the roster. So it'll be interesting to see. I think now in training camp, you get to carry more guys throughout the whole process. So we're not going to see like a bunch of small cuts. We're going to see bigger cuts. So I'm glad that Richards will get an opportunity to digest the offense, maybe take steps throughout training camp and prove if they want to invest in him and try to build him, or prove if they don't want to, and then they move on and they keep the veteran in Chuma Edoga. So that's interesting because I think Matt Farniok, of all the backup linemen, Waletzko, Ball, Hoffman, Lindstrom, Edoga, Bass, it seems like Farniok is the one the Cowboys are most – I feel like they have the most faith in Matt Farniok. And I think he's for sure on the roster. And then I think, it's let's go, maybe Ball. But it'll be interesting to see because last year you said they kept 9. And I believe there's 16 here. So they're not going to be able to – so 6 of these guys are going to get cut for sure.
And for me, it's interesting because we've talked previously again on the show about, Eric Scott Jr., the cornerback, how, when people have been reporting about the Cowboys preseason up to this point, his name has just been kind of thrown in at various times. So it's kind of made you sort of like raise your eyebrows a bit and think there's obviously something there that the team's seeing. And I kind of feel like it's the opposite effect with Josh Ball, where it felt like early on, there was a lot of talk about him and, him moving into that position. And then over time, they seem to have moved away from like him to a few of those other guys you've mentioned who now seem to sort of be in front of him. So they haven't sort of said like directly that, Ball is now behind a few other guys, but it really feels like reading the tea leaves that, he doesn't seem to be sort of in that pecking order where he was at the start of the preseason. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see how it plays out when they actually start sort of getting all of those guys together and start playing around with the rotations because, they've got some great offensive linemen. And I think it's one of those things that they've seen injuries and, Tyron Smith is still going to be a question mark. And it's something that they're really kind of focused on trying to, at the very least, sort of minimize that kind of chopping and changing that they've had to sort of do in years past because of, injuries. So it'll be nice if they can sort of get a couple of guys and say, okay, this is our swing tackle, and then this is our backup guard, and then, if need be, who their backup center is, and then just be able to sort of swap in rather than having to do that kind of rotation that they've had to do previously.
Yeah. And McCarthy has a history of taking like mid-round draft picks, turning them into, high-end offensive linemen. So I'd like to see that happen with at least one guy here. And also, Dak just turned 30 years old. Like I don't like to, for a 30-year-old quarterback, they could play for 6, 7 more years, but I like to think we have about a 3-year window right now. So it would be nice to see them, if Terrence Steele's the guy, lock him up. It'd be nice to see them develop because I think we can get 2 or 3 more great years from Zach Martin. It'd be nice to see the offensive line fall into place with a set piece of guys that we could have for the next 2 or 3 years and really go on this run, because I'm excited about this roster. I think we got some dogs. I think we got good coaches. I'm in, on McCarthy. I'm in on Quinn. I think Dak is a phenomenal reader, and I love, that all of you listening at home. I love the comments, everything. And I know some people love Dak. Some people don't like Dak. I think Dak is an excellent leader. And I think that trait is undervalued. I think he's tough. He's physical. He's gritty. Is he the passer Tony Romo was? No, but a lot of people hated Tony Romo as well. And, there's intangibles that Dak has, Tony didn't have. There's intangible Tony had, Dak didn't have. But I think we can win with Dak, especially if we're, McCarthy, he had success, running the football, I think high end, and this isn't that episode. So I don't know why I'm going down this tangent, but I'm excited. It would be nice to see an offensive line set in place for a few years so we can go on this run with Dak. All right, let's move on to the cornerback position, okay? Last year, they kept 11 guys, 5 safeties, 6 corners, which is crazy. All right, so now the current depth chart at these positions. We got Stephon Gilmore, followed by Nashawn Wright, followed by C.J. Goodwin, who's a special teams ace, followed by Miles Brook. At right cornerback, we have Trevon Diggs, Kelvin Joseph, Eric Scott, D'Angelo Mandel, and then at the nickelback, Jordan Lewis and Deron Bland. So I think there's quite a few guys on the bubble here. I think Jordan Lewis is on the bubble. I think Kelvin Joseph is on the bubble. I think C.J. Goodwin, who's been around and taken up roster spots on special teams, I think they might try. I think Kelvin Joseph and C.J. Goodwin might be fighting for a defensive back spot and a special team spot. But these at these corner positions, it's going to be because the Cowboys are trying to get Eric Scott in there, and Deron Bland has proved he's a dude. Nashawn Wright, he looks like he's putting in the work this offseason, but he's going to have to go into camp and prove it. So Campey, speaking of camp, what are your thoughts on the training camp battle at the defensive back position?
Yeah, well, once again, you and I have talked about this. Like, obviously, the Cowboys really need to be thinking about this season, but next season as well, because you kind of feel like you've got the Diggs contract situation coming up, and then Gilmore you really think is a 1-year kind of rental. So it's a question of, okay, so what are we going to do after this? We want to make sure that we've got some guys who can come in next year who they're comfortable with playing. So it's kind of an interesting situation. And yeah, I feel like Joseph is probably sort of out the door. They've been mixing and matching where he's playing, and trying to find. And if you're sort of like a rookie and they're sort of swinging you around, you occasionally get that guy who might be a quarterback in college, and then they sort of try and give him another position, and sometimes that kind of works. But if you're a bit more of a veteran player and they're moving you around, it's generally kind of a bit of a red flag that they're trying to see whether or not they can get anything out of you before they push you out the door. So I'm not sure he's going to be around too much longer. It's going to be interesting. I'll be interested to actually hear what your thoughts are. Like last year, they took 5 safeties on their roster, and I'm sort of thinking that they might drop that down one this year and just stick with 4. So it's going to be interesting to see, because if they do that, obviously they can fit in one more cornerback. And as we've sort of said, like as just previously mentioned, there's a couple of guys that may or may not be here next year. So you kind of want to, if you can, keep a few guys in the building that you can sort of see that they might have potential for the future. So I would be interested to see whether or not they're going to go long at cornerback and slightly shorter at safety, or they're going to keep the similar numbers to last year.
So right now at safety, they got Donovan Wilson, Malik Hooker, who I believe Malik Hooker is a free agent after this year. J-Ron Kearse, who's also free agent after this year. Israel Mukuamu, who's coming into his 3rd or 4th season. Marquise Bell, 2nd-year player. Tyler Coyle, Sheldrick Redwine, So right now they have 8. I could see a situation. So Bell, I believe, made the roster last year. So he wasn't a practice squad guy. So I could see them maybe trying to get him on the practice squad. But if they don't, it's really going to be between Mukwamu and Bell, who will, if they try to go down to 4 from 5, that'll be the big training camp competition. And Mukwamu's got the length, he's got the experience, but they obviously were interested enough in Bell. I believe he was an undrafted free agent last year who made the roster. And when I watched this film prior to, I believe he went to UAB, prior to the draft last year, you watch him, you look at his combine measurables, he's like a J-Ron Curse light. Like he kind of, but where he excels is tackling in space. J-Ron Curse is good in space, but J-Ron Curse is lengthy and sticky in coverage with those high-end tight ends. Bell doesn't have the coverage instincts yet, which he can work on. But Bell, you put him in the box, and he's not the thumper that Donovan Wilson is, but he's a sure tackler. So they're a little bit different. So I think Mukwamu's probably more of the coverage guy of the two. So it'll be, because depending on who they keep, it'll show you what the Cowboys think they need. Do they need that coverage guy, or do they need that surefire tackler? So I don't know, man. It's going to be tough. And with the Kelvin Joseph, not to beat a dead horse here, but I wonder, are the Cowboys trying harder than Kelvin Joseph to find him a spot? And I don't know the guy, and I'm not questioning his work ethic, but they're trying very hard. And if at some point they realize, like, hey, we're putting more effort than this kid is, that's when he gets shown the door. So let's move on to one more training camp battle. All right. And this is at the tight end position. And obviously there's some more training camp battles that, we could discuss, and maybe we'll get into some more next week. But we wanted to kind of highlight these ones because I think this is where we're going to see some significant roster cuts, right? So at tight end last year, they kept 3. All right. The current depth chart is Jake Ferguson, Luke Schoonmaker, who was drafted in the 2nd, Peyton Hendershot, and Sean McKeon. And those 4, to be honest, I don't see a situation where any of them are cut. Like Schoonmaker, he's got to come in. He's got a little bit of an injury history, and I don't know if it's anything significant, but it seems like he's had this going on, had that going on, and Ferguson, he played great last year, but so I think there's a chance Schoonmaker or Ferguson becomes a future tight end 1 in this organization, but they don't know which of them is yet. And then Hendershot, he's got a role. He's like the field stretching, big play, vertical tight end. So they got to keep Schoonmaker. They got to keep Ferguson. Hendershot has earned his role. And McKeon, he saw reps last year as well. And think about how many tight ends they put on the field last year. McKeon saw reps, Hendershot saw reps, Schultz saw reps, Ferguson saw reps. So I don't see a situation where any of these guys are cut, but Campey. What are your thoughts, Camp?
Yeah, I have a feeling there is one more tight end that they've actually kept at the moment, but I can't. His name escapes me at the moment, but. Yeah, I feel like at this stage these 4 are going to be there. So I know that last year
Seth Green, it says they have on the roster. They have a 5th guy, Seth Green.
So so like McKeon was he was at the start of the season was off the roster last year, but then came on in October, and he did a few good things for them. So. Yeah, as you said, I feel like they're all going to be there. I think the big question will be what kind of sort of split we're going to see of game time, really. And that's going to be the interesting thing for me when we get to training camp, because I think, you like to hope, and we've discussed once again before, that, Schoonmaker, you kind of hope that he's going to be that all-round, can do a bit of everything kind of tight end. But whether or not it's this year or whether or not it's next year or whatever, we don't really know yet. So I think the the question about these 4 guys will not be whether or not they're going to be on the roster. I think they'll probably all be on the roster. It'll be a case of how they split that time. So
Yeah,
it's going to be an interesting battle to kind of see. Yeah, like, you know, we find that quite often rookie tight ends can take a while to get going, which is kind of interesting when you look at the Cowboys from last year, where they were getting quite good production from young guys. So, you know, that hopefully kind of gives them a leg up. And then they're bringing in a highly touted rookie as well. So it's kind of a really good mix of young guys. And you just kind of hope that someone kind of lifts their game a bit, so that, as you know, once again, we keep rehashing, we want that tight end who can do a bit of everything. So you kind of just hope that one of them is really going to be that everyman, that he's just going to be, he can be put on the field and left there. So yeah, I'm dying to see these guys actually run out there and see how much of a leap that we see from, our sort of now I guess you can call them veteran tight ends,
right?
How much of a leap they make, and then how fast the rookie can come along and be comparable to them, I guess.
So I think that I enjoyed how the Cowboys rotated their tight ends last year. I do believe Schoonmaker is the future of this offense. I think eventually he will be the every down guy, phenomenal blocker, and like one of his best stats last year that people didn't get to see. Like you look at his PFF grade as yards per route, like yards of creation created per route. I believe that's not exactly how the stat goes, but I think yards of separation created. There we go. It's early for me. Yards of separation created per route run was elite. And that's, for me, that's a comforting thought, because that's, means less turnovers, right? If he's creating major yards of separation, Dak targets him. And then on the other hand, and he could block, he can create separation, great hands. He's a future. But Ferguson now rotated with a guy like that. I remember Jim Nagy last year after the Senior Bowl saying that Ferguson had the best hands of every receiving option who was at the Senior Bowl. So Ferguson stepped up, played meaningful reps last year, and I'm excited for these 3 young guns, like including Peyton Hendershot. We don't need an alpha. We need to manage these 3 correctly, because they're all hungry. They're all fighting for playing time. Like, it's like hungry dogs. Like, just take the leash off. Just use them until the day comes where Schoonmaker steps up and takes it. But I'm super excited for the rotation. And I also like kind of the camaraderie they all had last year. Like, it seemed like all the tight ends had fun together. So let's just, all of them, give them reps. Let's excel. Let's have some excitement. It kind of reminded me of early Dak and Zeke, like just kind of there, like when one of them would do something, how they'd celebrate each other. It seemed like the tight ends kind of had that thing going on, and that's always good for a roster. I'm going to compare it to like the Major League Baseball. Like before a playoff run, you bring up a young player. That young player, if he plays well, usually brings he lightens the mood in the dugout and in the locker room, and all of a sudden the veterans start playing a little younger and acting a little younger. So having that around the roster, I think, is super exciting. But Camp, before we wrap this thing up, do you have anything else you would like to discuss or touch on?
No, it's kind of interesting because, as we said, the tight ends I feel like are locked in, and it'll be a case of playing time. And then it's, I think cornerback, I feel like we've got our left cornerback, our right cornerback, and I feel like Bland is going to be the nickel cornerback. I feel like, I feel like they're kind of what the Cowboys are looking at. So it becomes a question of, what the fullback position is at those 3 spots, and whether or not, they look for this year or they're looking to the future. And then, then you've got your offensive line, and your offensive line, it's still a question mark of whether or not they're really, once again, looking for a starter or they're looking for some sort of fill-in spots. So it's going to be really good once the team hits the field to have a look at these 3 positions and some other positions as well, to sort of figure out how sort of everything sort of comes together, because the Cowboys are, well aware that they have a decent team. They have a team that they want to do well in the playoffs. So
right,
they've got to really, they've got to make the right calls here, and it's going to be interesting to see what those calls are. And yeah, I just can't wait for them to hit the field so we can actually start hearing the positive stories. But as you've said, I think right now we just need to be happy and jumping for joy that the fact that we're not hearing any stories, because if you're not hearing stories at this time of year, it's the best news you can be asking for. So.
Yeah. And touching on what you said about them being aware that they have a good team, I think they're also aware of how good Philadelphia is and how good San Francisco is. And I think they're aware that there's a margin of error that they can afford, and it's slim. So these roster decisions and the building of the depth of this roster is pivotal to whether or not we can take a step, and obviously, we need guys to develop. We need guys to stay healthy. We need guys to step up, but we also need to make the correct decisions here. But everybody, you've made the correct decision for tuning in for the whole episode, following and subscribing to the Toilets Titles Podcast Network, being fans of Now About Them Cowboys. It'd be appreciated if you, in the comments, let us know. Next week, we were thinking about kind of maybe talking of projecting who we think could be Pro Bowlers next year, but we could stick to training camp battles. Let us know if there's other battles you would like us to discuss next week, which would be the final episode before the start of training camp. Throw it in the comments. Let us know. And then also, if we didn't touch on a guy that you liked, or if there's a situation you think could play out differently, let us know that in the comments as well. Again, I'm on the Twitter at Coach Sheps. Camp is on the Twitter at Andrew Campey. The show and the network are on the Twitter at Toilets to Titles. We will catch you all later on. Take care.